They're a big developer. They put together the last parcels along what used to be owned by ABC, and GID built 3 buildings. They called it Waterline. We were able to, before COVID happened, we were able to put together a deal for the big penthouse on one of the buildings. We rode this deal through COVID. They were very scared about it. Oh my God, we're spending, close to $20 million for it. We took an RV out of New York, which is not something everybody does, by the way. And we were driving through West Virginia, and I get a call as I'm driving, and it's my buyer. He wants out of this deal. He freaked out.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Land Development Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Glick. If this is your first time joining us each week, when you tune in, you'll hear one of 2 different types of shows. Sometimes when you tune in, you're going to hear industry news. That's where we pull up a few different headlines and we talk about what it means for the land development industry. Other times when you tune in, you're going to hear an interview style show, and that's where we have on someone associated with the land development industry. We talk about their origin story, and then we dig into some topics that are related to them. Now, today I'm excited to have with me Scott Harris. Scott is the founder at Magnetic, a New York-based residential real estate company. Scott, thanks for joining me.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess where I want to start is where I start on all these episodes is really digging into your background. And when I was doing a little prep work coming into this episode, it looks like you got your start in real estate back in the early 2000s. And, so you've had some experience in the industry. But when we rewind back to when you first got into real estate, what was it that got you interested and got you hooked?
Well, first, it's always fun to talk about this stuff because people think, oh, there's like a through line, but it only looks like that looking back on it. My mom was the marketing director for a residential brokerage in New Orleans, where I grew up, and my dad was a commercial landlord. So I had a lot of real estate around the kitchen table. And when I got out of college, I actually toured the country in an RV in a band. So I spent a lot of time not in real estate, but I saw a whole lot of the country, which was great. And then my stepmom suggested, she said, hey, you might be interested in getting into real estate. I never thought about it as a profession, but it turns out all the things I'd done before that, whether it was sales related or just engaging with people, really turned out to be like this wonderful school for becoming a residential broker. So I talk numbers, I talk a lot of the emotional side of what goes on underneath the transaction. And then, as I got much more and more quickly involved in real estate, I found myself talking to a lot of developers as well.
Nice. So at some point you broke out onto your own. So you created your own agency. And what has that process been like?
Well, actually, it's relatively new. So I've been a broker for 22 years, and I only launched Magnetic in this calendar year. So I was at the last firm where I was for 18 years, doing a lot of both resales and working, helping buyers with new developments. And of course, having a lot of conversations with the real estate industry about all the different elements of developing properties. But I realized we were the number 2 or number 3 team at our last firm for many years, and it was time to spread our wings, basically because we love what we do and it's very people focused, and we obviously thought we could come out and give people an elevated experience.
Well, what's that process been like so far this year? I know we're recording this right now in the beginning of May. So, it's been a few months since you've launched that company. What's it been like early on? Because I think a lot of people think about starting their own company or branching out on their own, and they may not know what they're getting into and everything like that. But what's the process been like for you so far?
I'll give a shout out. We have a vendor partner that's called Side that is powering all of the behind the scenes. So if you're in the top 20% in your market and they happen to operate in that market, Side really gave us a leg up because I do business development. I'm really an entrepreneur at heart, of course, sales guy, but a lot of the insurance and all of the behind the scenes. I mean, basically, if you're a developer, every single development is like a new business also. So people can appreciate this. But just all of the nuts and bolts of launching a new business, certainly in real estate, it's a little distracting. So Side has helped about 600 to 700 companies launch around the country. If they were a standalone brokerage, really like the leading that, they'd be they are the number 9 largest brokerage in the country, number 1 in California. I came on as what they call a founding partner in New York, we're the largest company that launched using their kind of white label service. But they've been terrific. They helped me with branding and website and all of the stuff that as we were ramping up for the launch. But it's got its ups and downs. We picked up our team and moved it over to Magnetic, and it's been fun. We've brought on new listings. We're working with buyers. We're kind of doing, at this stage of my career, a lot of it is word of mouth and referrals. And so on some level, we're working very hard to continue to have brand awareness of what we do to the public and doing a lot of advertising and marketing around that. And then just continuing to do what we do as far as generating new leads and things like that. But it's, in addition to that, I also have a book coming out in 6 months. So, it's a lot of marketing effort, and it's been really fun to articulate how we do it, what we do differently. But it's like anything. It was scary as can be. It felt like a very scary move, but it also felt like a move that we had to make.
Yeah. Well, is the book something you want to plug right now, or is that something you want to hold off on until it gets closer?
Yeah, let's plug it as we get closer. I think let's talk about the stuff that your listeners want to talk about, and I think it's fun. It's called The Pursuit of Home. They can pre-order it, but I think it's for the purposes of this chat, we can definitely put it on the side.
All right. Well, at the very least, I'll throw it in the show notes for this episode. So anybody who's intrigued, they can check out the show notes page and get the link to it there.
Perfect.
So with your company Magnetic, I am interested, for those who are not familiar with it or of the services that you provide, can you give us a breakdown of what your company actually does?
Of course. So it's residential brokerage. So the big in New York City, that looks like helping people buy and sell condominiums, cooperative apartments, townhouses, and there's a whole component of investors for whom we offer services to help them find tenants. We work with investors to help them buy as well. And then sort of the cherry on top is when we work with developers as they look at a piece of land, or maybe it's an office that they want to convert to residential. We'll give them some advice on what do we think on a price per square foot something is worth, what does the programming look like? What are the constraints in a pre-existing building in terms of unit size? So there's some advising there, but the vast majority of what we do is resale apartment sales.
I'm really curious about that. So you mentioned the conversion of office space to residential. Are you seeing a lot of that out in New York?
Well, the office industry in general for over the last really since COVID, it's in many markets, it's been like a bloodbath. You can look at San Francisco, that office market has been decimated. New York, what's happened is there's some really amazing new office buildings that have blown away the competition. They don't have as many columns inside and things like that. And so a lot of the Class B, Class C office space has definitely suffered. And developers, there are some new programs. In New York, a lot of the constraints are not the land, although there are many, many constraints, but it's what's the zoning, what are the rules that in terms of, and how are the financials that allow developers to make money and make these things make sense. So there's a lot of it going on. There's some of the biggest office to resi conversions happening in New York. There's a company called Metro Loft that's converting. They're doing like a 1,200 unit conversion and maybe even a 1,600 unit conversion here. It's interesting. I've had conversations with people who are doing it in Dallas and in Chicago, and they're eyeballing this because if you have a lot of columns in a space, it serves better to like make smaller rental units, studios, and one bedrooms. And as long as the taxes and the common charges are reasonable, meaning that what are the monthly charges to operate the units, it works really well as a rental for, let's say a real estate investment trust, somebody who's putting those things together, or it could work as a condo conversion.
Gotcha. When you say columns, like columns in space, what does that mean?
So inside of the building, you'll have columns that kind of get in the way of creating like a nice big open space.
Gotcha.
So it lends itself to smaller room. Basically, you can't have a 3-bedroom apartment with a huge living room because the columns will kind of get in the way. And so it looks better. It works better for smaller units.
Gotcha.
And also, depending on how deep the space is, sometimes you have to actually cut out like a column or like an air shaft in the middle of the building. It gets complicated very quickly.
Yeah, so I feel like only one other time I've talked about this with someone on here on these conversions. And there were definitely things brought up that I hadn't really thought about when you go from office and having internal internal offices that don't have windows and things like that. And then you start talking about converting to residential, and it's like, well, there's certain codes that you have to follow and everything. So it does get complicated, it seems like, with those conversions.
The other thing I'll say, as long as we're on the topic, there has been a really neat change, which I think a lot of developers are just hearing about, and also as a residential agent, I'm just starting to really digest all of the news. But there's a program in New York called the City of Yes, and what it's meant to do is really encourage the creation of new housing stock, because there's this super shortage. I mean, we have a need for 500,000 units of residential in New York, and one little change has become very interesting. They used to have what's called a sliver law. So you couldn't build a tall building, even if you had a certain amount of buildable square footage allotted to a building. It was zoned right. You could build it. If it were as of right, you could build 20 stories, say. But the sliver law meant you couldn't build it unless it was wider than 40 feet.
Mm.
So now, if you have a 20-foot building, you can actually do, kind of the original thing you thought you could do. And it's going to be really weird, probably, and interesting. All of a sudden, you're going to have all these little like toothpick buildings all over the place if this comes to pass.
That is really interesting. And you brought up the housing out there in New York, and that's something that I was interested in. I don't think I've had anybody on the show from New York, so you're the first. But
awesome.
What's the market like out there? It sounds like there's a big shortage there, just like there is in other parts of the country. How about from an affordability standpoint? Because when I think of New York City, I think of it's not cheap. So what's that even look like? Is affordable housing even a thing that can be considered in New York?
The vast majority of what is considered affordable housing here is all rental. So they're all manner of programs to help people. They're housing vouchers. There's lots, and that's not housing that we typically are very involved in. We don't do a lot of the rental side, except for investors, like market rate apartments. But affordable starts to be interesting. There's a lot of it in the Bronx and Brooklyn and in Manhattan. We focus on Manhattan and Brooklyn. Overall, the market and what we focus on is kind of, I would call it the luxury end of the market. Our average deal size is a little bit over $2 million. We did $150 million in sales last year. We've sold about $2 billion in the last 20 years. And parking spaces in some of these buildings can be $500,000, just the parking space. So just to give you a flavor of what's going on, the market right now has definitely been bifurcated. It's not like a tale of one market. It's lots of little markets. The luxury end of the market, which we consider north of 4 million, has been stronger than the rest of the market. Construction costs have gone up. So apartments that need to be renovated are less popular, and taxes and some other constraints. I haven't even talked about mortgage rates, but are putting some downward pressure on pricing, and the cost of renovation jumped. It almost doubled, more than doubled after COVID 5 years ago. So it's been a challenging market, but ultimately in residential, people get divorced, they get married, they have kids, people pass away. So there's always a need, and people can only wait for so long before. Right. And the interesting thing right now too is that inventory in New York, in Manhattan proper, is actually better than in, let's say, the suburbs. So there's an inventory issue out in the suburbs, and what's happened is nobody can move. So there's actually a rental, the rent rolls are going way up in a lot of rent and free market apartment buildings because nobody can move. So there's this interesting kind of thing. And so ultimately it's going to, as rates, even if rates come down a tiny, tiny bit, all of that will end up helping our sales market. Also because prices have not been, they've kind of come down over the last couple of years, whereas in every part of the country, they've gone up. And the only thing I'll say also is that our market is like 60% cash, which is interesting, right? Most people are like thinking about mortgage rates and how that affects buyer capacity. But here, most people, if they're financing, they're doing it like with private wealth manager, things like that.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's kind of like a lot of the people moving from California to Texas. Everybody's talking about interest rates, but a lot of that, they're selling their houses for a decent amount of money out there and then coming into Texas where the cost of living is less. And so they're able to come in and do cash deals. And so the interest rates, like just like you said, the interest rates don't necessarily even come into play in those situations. If they like the home and the price and everything, they're going to come in with a cash offer and actually purchase the home. So that's interesting. I didn't really think about that out there in New York. Makes sense. So I guess you had mentioned the 500,000 units, and I am curious on that. Do you see those? Because I think of New York as not having a bunch of excess land, and so are those mainly conversions? Is there some like infill development where there's actually space where they can build, or is that kind of where you're talking about the restrictions that have been there keeping skinnier buildings from being built? Now that that's lifted, that's going to help achieve these 500,000 unit shortage that there currently is.
Um, 500,000 apartments or housing units that are needed. This is going to probably address like the tiniest bit
Yeah.
of that need. And that's across all 5 boroughs. So you'll see massive development continuing outside of Manhattan where there is more land. You'll see, I mean, in Brooklyn, you'll see huge developments going up. But the other constraint is that there's some union versus non-union labor stuff that's going on in New York.
Mm.
And so depending on the location, some developers are building up to 99 units or 149 units, depending on what the rules say. So it's almost, I've seen situations where you have a piece of land. I have a developer who's going to build something on the east side in the 80s, which is, just east of Central Park. And they're going to probably build 2 buildings kind of next to each other with separate entrances to work around some of the rules about whether they can build union or not build union, because union construction can cost 30 to 40% more and really make it difficult to make money. And then the other piece is that, and this is a long answer to a short question, but the average deal size, the average cost per square foot, depending on where you are, the larger the unit, in many cases, ends up being more of a benefit. Like the developer can make more money with larger units here, and so you don't see a lot of studios and 1 bedrooms getting built.
Okay.
And so if they're smaller, some of these the only thing that it will solve is that you just can't build huge apartments if you're in a skinny situation, skinny lot in an 18-foot lot. So there might be some more 2 and 3 bedroom apartments. Maybe there'll be a few more duplexes, things like that. But it's going to be an interesting thing to see. But I think none of it addresses like the massive need. I think that'll continue to be a challenge. And unfortunately, there's a lot of what they call NIMBYs, not in my backyard. So you've got a lot of people fighting developments as they pop up. So it's a push-pull.
This episode of the Land Development Podcast is sponsored by Groove. Groove lets you look up parcel ownership, view lot lines, and overlay key data like floodplains and school districts. You can even track conversations with landowners right on the parcel, so everything stays organized and easy to find. Start your free trial today at letsgroove.com/signup. That's letsgroov.com/signup. All right, let's get back to the show. It's so interesting. I mean, you have the red tape from, the municipalities and the different governmental agencies, and then you have the union situation, and then you have the residents also. So it's like it's just coming at developers from all different angles and everything like that. So it is going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. I would be interested to switch over to I know you've done development and land acquisition in the past. I'm curious what that looked like, and if you can share anything about your experience when you've been involved in some projects.
So early in my career, if people are familiar with like Danny Meyer, who created Shake Shack, which is so his first Shake Shack was here in New York in a place called Madison Square Park. So you heard Madison Square Garden, Madison Square Park, the Statue of Liberty, fun fact, was in pieces sitting in Madison Square Park before it was brought down to where it was ultimately put together, right? So it's got a cool history. We worked on a development there where, as of right, they were able to build about a 650-foot tall building, and we advised on that all the way from the start, unit size, layouts, interior finishes, and so on. And they had a second building, which didn't end up getting built. In fact, it's such a cool design. I ended up framing the architect's design and putting it in a frame on my wall here in my office. But what ended up happening is that developer, it's a perfect encapsulation of what happens. The initial developer got kind of underwater with the cost overruns. He ended up losing it to receivership, and then a more established developer brought it home, a company called Related, which has big footprint in New York. They also do a lot of work with a separate company in Florida. But our experience there early in my career really informed, okay, what are buyers looking for? What are sellers looking for? That was like a $350 million sellout that we were involved in. The attorney in general had to get involved. It's like a really an interesting and crazy situation. But what it really proves is that you have to have deep pockets, a lot of patience, and a lot of creativity to get these buildings done in New York. It's a lot more complicated. We don't work with I have lots of partners. We'll invest as LPs in some development outside of New York. And that's fun because you want to participate in some of these things with your, I don't want to be a one income stream kind of a person. But in New York, it's, now and then we'll get to maybe invest in a property and hold on to a unit in a building, something like that.
Okay. So with your experience being on the broker side, right, brokering deals and everything, what do you think, for developers out there who may be out looking for off-market, land and things like that, but they may want to consider partnering with a broker to have them help try to find the land for them? What do you think a developer should look for in a good partner as far as a broker?
This is one of the most competitive markets for land, and certainly having off-market opportunities is really where it's at. I would say you've got sort of for the office to resi conversion, you've got some amazing players in the space that are well known, and you'd want to let them know, hey, we're on the look for it. If somebody's a little bit, of a smaller developer and they're looking, say, I want to take a townhouse or two townhouses side by side and try to do something there. I think what you really, it's a case by case. I would tell any developer, and this is not me, the advice is you got to talk to a lot of agents.
Yeah.
You just got to talk to a lot of people and say, hey, I'm looking, let me know if you hear of something good, and be loyal. If somebody brings you a deal, they're the ones who are going to advise and ultimately sell it down the road. But, for me as an agent, I want to talk to as many people as possible. We had a townhouse downtown that ultimately sold for about 11 million 2 years ago. And, we had enough developer relationships. In that case, they were just going to take this $11 million property, probably invest 8 to 10 million in it, and then it'd be worth about 35 to 40. We're talking West Village, Sex in the City, kind of like primo block location. And so we spoke to 3 or 4 people, maybe 5. They gave a sense of what they would pay. And then you're sort of trying to work with the buyer community, the broker community as well. Is a primary user going to pay more? Is a developer going to pay more? And then ultimately, it gets sold. But it's all about relationships.
Yeah. Is there any way you think that someone can weed out maybe the ones that you probably shouldn't do business with? Is it more of just asking for references or seeing what they've done in the past to know if, maybe you're about to get into a relationship with somebody that you shouldn't get into a relationship with?
Well, I can tell you the cautionary tale. I just went into a building. So here, most townhouses are roughly 16 feet and up. And if they're more than 20 feet wide, which sounds like nothing, probably people across the country, there's more value to them. We walked into a 14-foot wide building, which is very skinny. And it's on the market now asking $11 million. And it was reported to be fully renovated. But when you go in and they're asking $3,000 a square foot, you walk in and it looks like they've used Home Depot finishes. This is not what you expect when you're looking to pay $3,000 a foot. And as it turns out, the contractor, whoever put this deal together, thinking, oh, you're going to pay, call it $3 or $4 million for the purchase, and then you're going to put 2 or 3 million in, and it's going to be worth 11. Somebody was not reputable there. There's some money that went out the door somewhere and didn't go into the finishes. So it's definitely important to vet who you're bringing in, and in terms of a price, your agent should definitely, in situations like this where it was money from outside the country, they didn't understand. Believe it or not, this sounds insane to me, but it may not sound as insane to somebody else, but these buildings, it's very expensive to put in elevators. This little skinny building had an elevator, and whoever was advising them told them to take it out, which is like, what are you doing? So they did everything they could possibly do to take away value, which is kind of fun for our conversation, but not fun for the seller. I told him he's asking 11. I told him I don't think we would get 5 million for it. So this guy's probably $3 or $4 million underwater.
Do you have a favorite deal that you've been a part of?
It's not. Well, I guess it's sort of interesting. There's a company based out of Boston called GID. They're a big developer. They put together the last parcels along what used to be owned by ABC, the television company. Trump had built a bunch of these, or had his name on a bunch of these along Hudson River between 57th Street and 72nd. So there's a last parcel, and GID built 3 buildings. They called it Waterline Square. And we were able to, before COVID happened, we were able to put together a deal for the big penthouse on one of the buildings. And what was needed had a tax abatement, which happens a lot here. So even though it was about a 5,000 square foot space, the monthlies were very, very reasonable, and the taxes were $0 or maybe $500 a month, which is nothing. And we rode this deal through COVID. They were very scared about it. Oh my God, we're spending, close to $20 million for it. And then I was driving an RV because our business was completely shut during that time for about 3 or 4 months. I said, let's go on vacation, kids.
Yeah.
We took an RV out of New York, which is not something everybody does, by the way. And we were driving through West Virginia, and I get a call as I'm driving, and it's my buyer. He wants out of this deal. He freaked out. Anyway, fast forward 2 years, he closed on it, but it was really, I'm very proud of that deal because it was really all about holding enough space so this guy could work through all the issues and his concerns about it. Ultimately, the developer did a great job of completing the apartment, and it was a fun deal.
Yeah, that's awesome. I bet that was some tough news as you're driving the RV in West Virginia, and all of a sudden,
I was like, let me just drive this sucker off the road.
Yeah, right. Well, let's shift into at the end here. We have a lightning round where I have 5 questions for you, just about your experience and everything like that we'll go through, and then we'll close out the episode. First question for you is, what's the best piece of advice you've received so far in your career?
Slow down. Slow down. Definitely slow down, and don't freak out. It's going to be okay.
I like it.
Slow down and stay calm.
Yes. All right. If someone out there is looking to start their own business, whether it's a brokerage or even, a development business, what general business advice would you give them, especially with your, few months of starting up your own company here? Plus, you've had a team too that you've managed over the years as well. Sure. So, I mean, that's entrepreneurship as well.
Yeah, I would say that you only do it if you're really, really passionate about what you do. If you're really passionate and you know why you're doing it, you have a really clear sense of why, then go for it. Otherwise, just keep on being a salesperson.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I like that. All right. Since 2003, you had mentioned the over $2 billion in residential real estate bought and sold. What do you believe led to this success?
Being of service to people, making it about the people, my clients, how I can help them. The more value I add to our relationship, the more it's resulted in sales. I'm, be incredibly resourceful. I'm like a dog with a bone. I never want to let a deal go. Let's figure it out. We're going to figure it out, make it happen. I always believe that it's going to happen.
All right. 4th one here. If you could go back in time and tell yourself something when you were first getting into real estate, what would it be?
I would tell myself, hey, it's not always about the transaction. There's always, when people have a dollar and cents objection, it's often about something else. So listen much more than you talk. Ask more questions than give answers. And often the problem, in quotes, will solve itself.
All right, last one here. Why New York? What keeps you in New York?
New York is endlessly interesting. The people who come here are out to do something big in the world, and it in every industry. And I just love the people and the energy. And I love that I don't own a car, I don't have a backyard, and yet it's this vibrant place with so much going on. It's always changing right in front of me.
Awesome. Well, what's the best way for people listening in to learn more about your company and to connect with you?
If people go on to LinkedIn and just look up Scott Harris Magnetic, they can find me there. I post all the time. I tell lots of stories about New York City real estate, what I learn and it's all the people and the stories and all the ways that people get in their own way and maybe how you can avoid that. So LinkedIn is a great place. And if they want to follow me on Instagram, I'm at Scotty Harris, SCOTTIE Harris. And those are the two best places.
Awesome. All right. So, guys listening in, if you go down in the description, you'll see a link to the show notes page. Those links will all be there for you to connect. And yeah, I appreciate you hopping on here again and having this conversation. I know we're cutting off here at about 30 minutes. I'm sure there's so many more stories that you could share. So, we'll have to get those on LinkedIn from you and some of that information, everything there. So, thanks again for joining. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You bet. All right. That's all for this episode. We will talk to you all next week.